welcome to this channel called Zuzanareacts, where I learn all about Barab with your help and just share my Slovak European point of view as I see it. In today's video, we are going to look into Mahatma Gandhi. Now, the reason why I really wanted to look into this, because in the West, he's a very much, I don't want to say worship, but he's definitely like a good figure to look up to. And I've been hearing that apparently he's not so well perceived in India. And I just kind of really wanted to understand what this is all about. So there is a video that I'll pull up, and it's from one of your really favorite Abhijit guy, YouTuber, and I wanted to simply explore it. So come on to the journey with me, please.
This is the story of two men. One was American, the other was Indian. Both were lawyers, both were family men, both endured decades of struggle, both made immense sacrifices, both moved mountains to ascend to the pinnacle of national leadership. Both played a critical, pivotal role in shaping their nation's destiny. One came to be recognized as his nation's greatest president. The other went on to be revered as a saint, a Mahatma, the father of his nation. Both would eventually fall to an assassin's bullets. And as national leaders, they both found themselves staring at the same stark choice: partition or civil war. Who made the right choice? Was it Abraham Lincoln, who went to war when the southern states seceded from the United States of America over the issue of slavery? Or was it Mohandas Gandhi, who agreed to India's partition when faced with Muhammad Ali Jinnah's threat of a civil war that would pit Muslims against Hindus and Sikhs? Let's find out, starting with Abraham Lincoln's story. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in Kentucky, United States. In 1834, Lincoln was elected to the Illinois state legislature, where he gained a reputation as an eloquent speaker and a skilled debater. He was a strong advocate for individual rights, including the abolition of slavery. The central theme of Lincoln's political career and also his legacy was his fight against slavery. Slavery was practiced in North America right from the time of the European colonization of the Americas, which began in 1492. The first African slaves were transported to the British colonies in North America in the first quarter of the 17th century. In 1860, the total population of the US was approximately 31 million people. Of this total, only 500,000 were Native Americans, and approximately 12 million were African origin slaves. Think about it. Almost 40% of the American population was enslaved. Slavery was central to the economy of the United States. Slavery allowed for the production of cash crops such as tobacco and rice and cotton, which were major exports and major sources of income for the United States. The labor of enslaved people was essential for the profitability of large-scale plantations, which were the backbone of the US economy, especially in the southern states. Slaves were also used for mining and construction and other forms of labor that were crucial for the growth of the US economy. The use of slaves in agriculture and industry allowed for the expansion of US territory and the development of new regions such as the Southwest. The wealth generated by slavery helped finance the American Revolution and other early national projects such as the construction of the Capitol and the White House. This exploitation of slaves contributed to the growth of the textile industry, as cotton produced by slaves was processed and manufactured into textiles. Now, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the northern states began to industrialize. This led to the development of labor-saving devices and technology and other innovations that reduced the need for manual labor, for slave labor. This gradually led to a shift towards wage labor and away from the use of enslaved labor in manufacturing. These northern states had a more developed transportation infrastructure, which made it easier to transport goods and people without relying on slave labor. The growth of wage labor in the northern states led to a greater demand for immigrants and free African Americans to work in factories and other industries. These northern states had a more diverse economy that was less reliant on cash crops, such as cotton, that required the use of slave labor. Because of these economic and technological factors, the northern states gradually began to abolish slavery during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. These northern states had a larger population than the southern states, which meant that they had more political power and could push for the abolition of slavery throughout the United States to the detriment of the less developed southern states. And Abraham Lincoln's election as president in 1890 sparked a crisis in the South. South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. By January 1861, Mississippi and Florida and Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas had also seceded from the Union. By February that year, the Confederate States of America was formed with Jefferson Davis as its president. Soon, other states like Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee also seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy. So, Abraham Lincoln, the newly minted president of the United States, was left with two options: either accept the partition of the United States or go to war against the Confederacy. He chose war. The American Civil War began in April 1861. It was a brutal conflict, the most deadly conflict in US history until that point in time. Approximately 2% of the US population died in combat, and hundreds of thousands more died of disease. To make a long story short, the Civil War ended on April 9, 1865, with the surrender of the Confederate forces. Abraham Lincoln had succeeded in protecting the unity and territorial integrity of the United States. 6 days later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln's legacy continues to be celebrated and studied today. His life and leadership continue to inspire Americans. He is widely regarded as one of America's greatest presidents, and his influence on American society and history and culture is immense. Now let's talk about Mohandas Gandhi. Mohandas Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, in Porbandar, a coastal town in Gujarat, India. He was born into wealth and power. His father, Karamchand Gandhi, was a chief minister of Porbandar and later became the Diwan or prime minister of the princely state of Rajkot. Mr. Gandhi's life and political career must be examined in the context of the British occupation of India. The British East India Company was founded in 1600 near the end of the Elizabethan era, and its purpose was to trade with India. At that time, India was incredibly prosperous. In fact, India was the world's largest economy for the best part of the past 2 millennia. The East India Company hoped to dip into some of this incredible wealth and enrich its stakeholders, its shareholders, and the English crown in the process. It succeeded beyond the wildest dreams of its shareholders. By the first quarter of the 19th century, the East India Company had defeated the immense Maratha Empire and seized control of large parts of India. It managed to survive India's first war of independence in 1857, after which the British Crown assumed direct control of India in the form of the British Raj. The British rule over India was brutal. The British killed roughly 10 million Indians in reprisals in the aftermath of 1857 itself. And they engineered countless artificial famines year after year after year, which killed well over 100 million Indians. And this ended with the Bengal famine of 1943. In the process, the East India Company and the British stole over $45 trillion worth of wealth and resources from India, reducing the world's richest civilization to rubble and dooming hundreds of millions to desperate poverty. It is in this context that we must examine Mr. Gandhi's life and career. Mr. Gandhi migrated to South Africa in 1893 to work as a lawyer for an Indian merchant in Pretoria. Indians naturally faced appalling discrimination in South Africa under British rule. In 1894, Mr. Gandhi formed the Natal Indian Congress to advocate for the rights of Indian immigrants in South Africa. He soon developed the concept of satyagraha, passive, non-violent resistance, and used it to campaign for better treatment of Indians. In 1899, Mr. Gandhi sided with the British Empire during the Anglo-Boer War and formed the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps to provide medical assistance to wounded British soldiers. He even petitioned the British government to allow him and other Indians to fight for the British. Ashwin Desai and Ghulam Wahid's book, The South African Gandhi, Stretcher Bearer of Empire, shows that Mr. Gandhi demonstrated through his actions a strong loyalty to the British Empire. The book examines Mr. Gandhi's role as a stretcher bearer during the Anglo Boer War and shows that his actions during the war were motivated more by his loyalty to the British Crown than by any sense of anti imperialism or anti racism. After the Anglo Boer War, Mr. Gandhi continued to lead non-violent protests and civil disobedience campaigns in South Africa. His emphasis was always on passive resistance and non-violence. Mohandas Gandhi returned to India from South Africa in 1915 at the age of 46 as a celebrity. He immediately joined the Indian National Congress, which was created by the British bureaucrat Alan Hume in 1885. And Mr. Gandhi very rapidly became one of its most powerful leaders. Now, in 1906, the All India Muslim League was founded to represent the political interests of Indian Muslims. This was part of a long running British policy of divide and rule, which sought to create internal divisions and tensions within India. In 1919, the Muslim League supported the Khilafat movement, which called for the Indian Muslim population to support the Ottoman Caliphate in Turkey and to protest against the British government's policies in Turkey. Clearly, this issue had nothing to do with India and India's freedom struggle. That same year, Mr. Gandhi endorsed the Khilafat movement and amplified the Khilafat leaders' views and ideology. By 1921, Mr. Gandhi had become the undisputed leader of the Indian National Congress. In 1922, the Khilafat movement's leaders criticized Mr. Gandhi for his commitment to nonviolence and broke their ties with him. This movement, the Khilafat movement, fizzled out in 1924 when the Turkish dictator Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the caliphate. And yet, this Khilafat movement had a powerful cascading impact on the Indian freedom struggle. It became the catalyst for the demand for an Islamic Pakistan separate from India. In 1934, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, an erstwhile Indian nationalist who had opposed the formation of the Muslim League in 1906, returned to India after 14 years in the political wilderness. He set out to work for a separate homeland for India's Muslims. He set out to work towards partitioning India and creating a separate nation of Pakistan out of Indian territory. This also happened to be Britain's end game, their exit policy for India. Now, Mr. Gandhi was deeply opposed to India's partition. Mr. Gandhi said that India's partition would happen over his dead body, and he undertook several fasts to try and prevent the partition. And yet, India was partitioned on August 14, 1947, and received dominion status, not independence, on August 15, 1947. Mr. Gandhi then proceeded to coerce, arm twist the Indian National Congress into appointing the unpopular Jawaharlal Nehru, who happened to be favored by the British as India's first prime minister. On January 30, 1948, Mr. Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Godse. So now that we have examined and compared the careers and choices of Abraham Lincoln and Mohandas Gandhi, we must ask ourselves, Who made the right choice? Was it Abraham Lincoln, who went to war when the South seceded from the US over the issue of slavery? Or was it Mr. Gandhi, who agreed to India's partition when faced with Muhammad Ali Jinnah's threats of a civil war, which would pit Muslims against non Muslims? So here are the plain facts. After Mr. Lincoln's death, the United States went on to become a superpower. It is still the world's most prosperous and powerful nation. On the other hand, after Mr. Gandhi's death, India failed to live up to its immense potential in the 20th century. It remained an extremely poor nation with hundreds of millions of citizens suffering from crushing poverty. India is still a third world nation that is only now beginning to emerge as a major economic power in the third decade of the 21st century. It's taken that long. And what about Pakistan? Pakistan has forced India into 4 wars thus far. It has become the global epicenter of terrorism, and the civil war that Mr. Gandhi sought to avoid has taken on a nuclear dimension. So, who made the right choice? Who set his nation on the path to success and prosperity? And who set his nation on the path to further ruin? I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Lincoln made the right choice, an extremely difficult choice, but the right choice nevertheless in the long run. So, what could Mr. Gandhi have done differently? One way of answering this question is to ask ourselves, what would Abraham Lincoln have done if he were in Mr. Gandhi's position? Or what would the great statesman Vishnugupta Chanakya have done? Let's not forget that Chanakya defeated and dismantled the oppressive and immensely powerful Nanda Empire, which even Alexander could not conquer, and established the Mauryan Empire in its place. How would Chanakya have dealt with the British occupation and the prospect of India's partition? What would Chinggis Khan have done if he were in Gandhi's place? What would Mustafa Kemal Ataturk have done? What would Joseph Stalin have done? What would Mao Zedong have done? All of these leaders faced almost impossible odds and succeeded. Their careers give us viable models of what approaches could have been taken to liberate a unified India from British occupation. For instance, Mao Zedong, the Chinese dictator, would have opposed the British occupation in a very different way from Mr. Gandhi. He would have launched a guerrilla war against the British across the country. What did India have to lose? Anyway, the British had completely destroyed India economically. They had drained India of its immense wealth. They were killing hundreds of thousands of Indians every year, and life expectancy in India had fallen below 30. Can you imagine that? So India had absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain, which is why a guerrilla war would make a lot of sense. So Mao would have led a nationwide sustained guerrilla campaign to demoralize and defeat the British forces. The military campaign would only end with the surrender or defeat of the British forces and the liberation of a unified India. That's what worked for Mao in China, and that's what he would have done in India. And we can very well imagine what Chinggis Khan would have done to deal with the British if he were in Mr. Gandhi's place. It would be a campaign of all out sustained violence until victory was achieved. But we know that Mr. Gandhi abhorred violence. So, did Mr. Gandhi have any non violent means of defeating the British? As it turns out, he did. We know that everyone in India revered and worshipped Mr. Gandhi. He was regarded as a great spiritual leader, a dharma guru. People were willing to give up their lives at his command, and lots of people actually did. So here is the critical question. Why did Mr. Gandhi never ask the British Indian Army to launch a satyagraha, a non violent, non cooperation movement against the British? The soldiers would have obeyed him. This is a guarantee. In fact, the British Indian Navy did precisely this in February 1946. They revolted peacefully against British rule, mostly peacefully, and stopped obeying orders. The British Empire lost control of the Indian Navy overnight. Over 20,000 sailors in 78 ships deployed across a vast area from the Persian Gulf to the Malacca Strait. Had the Indian Army come to know about the naval revolt and joined in the rebellion, the British Empire would have collapsed like a pack of cards. Why?
Mhm.
Because the Indian armed forces, which Britain controlled, were the key to British rule in India. The British ruled India through force. Without that key, they could not rule. So the British Raj was on the brink of collapse and disintegration in February 1946. So, what did Mr. Gandhi do? Mr. Gandhi nipped the rebellion in the bud by dispatching Mr. Patel to negotiate with the naval officers and make them surrender. Mr. Patel succeeded, and the rebellion was quashed after just 1 week. Had Mr. Gandhi supported a non violent rebellion, a satyagraha by the Indian Navy and the armed forces, British rule in India would have ended overnight without any violence, and partition would not have happened. As simple as that. And communal violence could have been avoided by dealing robustly with the key politicians who sought to fan the flames of religious hatred. People like Jinnah and Suhrawardi and others. The Indian state apparatus was perfectly capable of dealing with such mischief mongers with an iron hand. So, what does this tell us? It tells us that Mr. Gandhi could have ended British rule in India overnight and prevented India's partition all without any violence if he so wished. He chose not to. The essence of leadership is service, service of a finite constituency. For national leaders, that finite constituency is the nation and its people. True leaders do not rule, they serve the nation and its people. False leaders serve hidden interests. Who does Kim Jong un serve in his capacity as the supreme leader of North Korea? Who did Dr. Manmohan Singh serve when he was India's prime minister? Who does the Pakistani prime minister serve? Does he serve the Pakistani nation and its people? Or does he serve the Pakistani army? And who does the Pakistani army serve? Does it serve the Pakistani nation and its people? Does the Pakistani army serve itself? Or does the Pakistani army serve external powers? Who did Abraham Lincoln serve? Who did Mohandas Gandhi serve? I leave the answers to you. Thank you.
Ooh, that's how I feel. Like, whoa, that has been intense amount of information. Okay. I mean, if you put it that way, I think I get it. What can I say? So it's a tricky one, right? And I think what he has done a good job of, he's tried to present the situation in the context, which I think that we only really, and this is why I'm not the biggest fan of politics, because we only are ever able to judge things, in a bigger context until the certain amount of time has passed. Whereas, like in politics, you just are just trying to judge based on the information that you currently are aware of, and you're not aware of gazillions of things. This is why I find it pointless. Now, it's such a tricky one because he's calling in also like the skills of leadership, and obviously looking at the nonviolent movement. And I think perhaps, I don't know, let's play the devil's advocate, that he was just trying to follow the Sataram Dharma, and what the world is one big family, and like not being violent towards others. And maybe that was the philosophy that he was indeed convinced of, and maybe his links with the English had no impact, maybe, right? We don't really know. And perhaps if he has done what was suggested, was that India would have been in a different place. However, how I like to look at it, and I'm just going to put a bit of you might not like it, a spiritual lens on, because I try to look at things also like just trying to understand it from spiritual kind of point of view. And I personally don't judge in a way, and of course we judge, but let's just try to take a different stance. Like everything, like good or bad, right? Like everything just is, and everything is a God creation, whether it's good or bad, because everything, like the white or black matter, they need to exist for us to exist, right? And in that context, perhaps not right now, India could have been somewhere else, but we all live our all nations karma, right? And we know from the history that empires rise and empires fall, and perhaps this is just a natural cycle of an empire that was successful for don't want to say millennia, but for centuries. And maybe that was just a natural cycle of life, that it had to fall in order to rebuild itself for a different kind of purpose. So I would like to think, I would like to give people a benefit of a doubt. I would like to believe that himself perhaps was thinking, let's just take this theory, that he was doing right by his nation. And, maybe that's a philosophy that he was, ready to die for. I don't know. How do you judge that, right? And several things happen. So, for example, if let's say the world wars haven't happened, we perhaps wouldn't have had the progress. So there always have to be the yin yang, there has to be balance, and maybe that's just nature's way of restoring maybe a balance. For a certain century, one country is a superpower, for another one, and it's just a very cyclical, right? And the life goes on. So I see what you guys, I think, mean about, like, this could have been done differently, and let's say your generation could have lived so much better life. I think perhaps there is a different lesson that needs to be learned here, and we all just have to, in a way, accept where we are. Like, from a spiritual point of view, and from what I've accustomed to know, is like we choose as a soul when we come here, we choose where we incarnate, we choose our parents, we choose the century. So I think, perhaps a highly evolved spiritual nation needed to emerge out of that, because sometimes it is through suffering that you grow. Like, we don't simply grow as humans in comfort much. And maybe, like, this had to happen for your country to, I don't know, let's say to emerge as a spiritual power, further, like enabling, the egotistical West, to see something more than maybe ego and technology. So we just kind of really never know the intricacies of life, and this is why it's just so fascinating. And wow, I would love to know what you guys think about him. I presume it's not perhaps as positive, but I think it's very hard for anyone to be in that type of position, and maybe hoping to really do the right by their people, and then it perhaps doesn't work out. Let's just maybe hope and try to judge people on intentions, because we just really never know. Like, even sometimes you just think about yourself, like, how many times have you done something that you thought was the right thing, and it actually ended up being completely wrong, and your intentions were pure, but the results were perhaps damaging. So I would just like to give people benefit of a doubt, and I would like to think that we are inherently good in our nature, and I will leave you with that message. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, please do take care. Much love. Bye-bye.